There's this increased push for efficiency and for ROI. That's coming up in almost every single one of my conversations right now. Just the other day, I was actually chatting with a UR leader who's being mandated to cut from 35 schools down to 10 schools. If I'm in that situation, how would you advise me to go about tailoring that list without actually losing critical pipelines that I've spent years creating?
Frankly, I'm not surprised you're hearing this, right? Almost 70% of UR teams are reported facing budget cuts in late 2024. We did some extensive interviews with pretty much all of our members, and I'm not sure we found a single company that is increasing the number of schools they're going to, or that their budget is increasing substantially. There might be some diamonds in the rough out there, but it certainly is a rarity. So it's not surprising to hear that you're hearing this on a day-to-day basis as well. Um, One nuance I'd actually add here before we dive into some potential solutions is that it might not always just be about cutting the number of target schools. It also might be about rethinking how you are specifically engaging with each school. And so, as I mentioned earlier, most teams now are using a tiered system, which has increased year over year. And that's really to guide not just which schools they engage with, but how they engage them. And that's where the tiering system comes into play. So there are certain types of events that we have found that really lend themselves well to or better in person. But that's not to say that there aren't other event types that can actually still be highly effective online. So I'll actually show some data right now. As you can see on the slide, when we asked candidates about the value of events by format, we found some really, really interesting trends around types of events and where their perceived value is or where their experienced value is. So what we found is that events focused on relationship building, think your career fairs and networking events, they're rated as far more effective when held in person. And that's what you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen right up here. Meanwhile, events focus on information sharing, right? Let's think employer presentations, panels, speaker series. They're actually rated almost equally as valuable online. So what this tells me as we're looking at some of this information is that there's a huge opportunity for teams looking to stretch their budgets, right? So match the event type to the format where we're actually seeing direct perceived or experienced value from those students. Now, as far as actually choosing schools with the highest ROI, that's one of the biggest mindset shifts that we're coaching teams through right now, given that there's a huge emphasis from the business and really from greater TA on that conversation of ROI. And so if we remember back to the common strategy misconceptions I mentioned at the very beginning today, school strategy can't be a set it and forget it decision. It has to be fluid. And the reasoning behind this is actually rather simple. It's because students change every single year. Hiring needs tend to change every single year. And even the schools themselves are constantly evolving. A really great example of this is anyone who's hiring or looking into AI talent. 5 years ago, that degree didn't exist at a bachelor's level. Right now, we are seeing schools increase the numbers of professors, and they're actually building degree types out around that area. So if your school selection wasn't fluid and you're trying to hire that talent, it certainly is now because there's only a handful of schools that are graduating talent in that area. But that's just one specific example of why it needs to be a tangibly fluid system. So the best teams are treating school strategy almost like product development. And this is actually a really great format to explain it to the business at times because it's different than the recruiting world. And so what they're doing when we say they're treating it like product development, they're ensuring they're tracking outcomes every single season, right? Spring, fall, winter, depending on what you break up your recruiting cycle to be. They're also measuring success with clear metrics. And then lastly, and really importantly, they're actually iterating. So they're iterating based on what the data and the experience historically is telling you. And that's, again, where some of these talent alignment scorecards come in. We've helped build a simple but powerful scorecard that you all saw recently that evaluates schools both on a quantitative and a qualitative dimension. Quantitative metrics are number of hires, right? Intern conversion rates, retention data, diversity goal alignment, potentially proximity to your buildings or where you're hosting students. And then just as importantly, we're seeing qualitative inputs, think strength of relationships with career services, engagement and brand presence on campus, feedback from recruiters about the quality of candidates coming through the events or hiring manager feedback. What we find is that companies that only look at the numbers, you can actually miss major relationship or brand building opportunities. And that is where the business partnership comes into play a lot. And so if you're only going off gut feel, again, you can miss hard ROI wins. So Hannah, to put this all into basically a one sentence answer for you, it's really about balancing the hard data with the human insights, and treating your school strategy like a living, breathing thing, something that you're truly refining season after season.